Creative Brain Candy by creators for creators.
You're listening to Simply Stogies, a podcast dedicated to the cigar enthusiast. Light up a stogie, sit back, relax, while James brings you along on his cigar journey. Simply Stogies will review cigars, discuss topics that cigar aficionados find important, sit down with guests from across the industry, and we'll probably learn a few things along the way. Now, here's your host of Simply Stogies, James.
Welcome to Simply Stogies. I am your host, James. This episode is a very special episode. They're all very special episodes, but this one's a little bit different because we're going to be talking with maybe someone that, I don't normally have authors on the show. Normally it's those in and around the cigar industry, but today we're joined by Nick Hammond. Nick Hammond is a world traveler. He is a former newspaper reporter. He was a copywriter. He was the inaugural winner of the Spectator Cigar Writer of the Year. He's a journalist and all around probably the most interesting man in the world and the author of Around the World in 80 Cigars. It's Nick Hammond. Nick, welcome to the show.
James, you need to be my intro man wherever I go.
I could certainly try to do that. But I honestly, reading this book, and we'll get into it here in just a little bit, you've got to be the most interesting man in the world. Like some of the things you have done and some of the places you've gone, and you've smoked cigars in all these places. Like it's an amazing book. I can't wait to get into it. But before we do, I'd like to invite you to go to oxfordcigarcompany.com and use coupon code Simply Stogies. Use coupon code Simply Stogies at oxfordcigarcompany.com and get 15% off your entire order. That's right, 15% off anything you put in your cart. Doesn't matter what it is. oxfordcigarcompany.com. Use coupon code Simply Stogies.
I'm Sergeant Cigar from Eyes Forward March. We're part of the Creative Brain Candy Media Cooperative, and I'm asking you to join myself and Sergeant Bacon every 2 weeks on Wednesdays. We're going to discuss everyday issues that leaders in the military have to face. We're going to exchange stories and have some laughs along the way. You can find us on Apple, Google, Spotify, or simply head over to creativebraincandy.com. While you're there, make sure to check out some of the other great podcasts who are part of the Creative Brain Candy family.
So Nick, let me start here, because normally when I start with a guest, I ask them things like, what was your first cigar, things like that. But with you, I want to ask, why did you write this book? What was the impetus behind writing this?
Yeah, good question, James. Thanks for having me on. It was a sort of labor of love, really. As you rightly said, I've spent my life being a writer of various sorts in various sectors and on just about everything you can think of, really, over the years I've written about. For newspapers and magazines, and then for companies and brands and individuals and websites, and I've always, in all my adult life, had a love for the cigar that I know you share, and I always thought, in the back of my mind, wouldn't it be lovely, to spend some time writing about that, and that's what I started doing, maybe 15, 20 years ago, just as a bit of fun, and it grew and grew into more of my time being taken writing about the world of cigars. And as your listeners will know, the more you sort of delve into it, the less you know, and the more you realize there is more to know. And it's a never-ending journey, and you meet fabulous people along the way. And it's a never-ending delight, really. And so I started to meet manufacturers and meet retailers and start traveling to cigar places, and just fell in love with the whole thing. And I, over the years, wrote about cigars for lots of people, lots of magazines. There aren't that many writers who write about cigars. There's lots of people who do write about cigars and blog and all that stuff, all of which is very valuable. But, as a sort of trained writer, I guess you'd say, I did it the old school way when I was a newshound. I do shorthand, and I studied law and public affairs and all that stuff. So I came at it from a very classical background, if you like, as a writer across a variety of topics. And so that helped me because I was able to get sort of cigar-y stuff into more mainstream publications and add a little cigar flavor to the stories I was writing. And that sort of grew and became more and more of what I did. And I started to write for some of the manufacturers, and I started to write for some of the retailers, and then I'd get invited to events and stuff. And it just sort of grew from there. And I realized probably back, I don't know, in the about 2015, 2016, that I had this, massive treasure trove of stories that I'd never really done anything with. It's not normally that, the stories that are in the book are not the sort of stories that you generally find in magazines and stuff. It's very personal experiences of me being somewhere, doing something extraordinary or interesting, and there's usually a cigar somewhere along the line, right? And so it became, I said, why don't I just write it? I've spent my life writing for other people. Wouldn't it be lovely to write for yourself? And so, I sort of did. And it took me a long time to convince myself that it was a worthwhile thing to do, because normally, you get a project or you get an assignment, you get a commission from somebody and they say, can you go and do X, Y, Z? And what you don't generally do is put masses and masses of hours and work and thought and effort into producing something in the hope that you're going to one day get it out there. So it's a bit of a leap of faith, but it started, and I really, really enjoyed it, having, to be able to write in my voice, the voice that I hear in my head, as opposed to writing a style that it was for a magazine or a particular brand or something. It was really refreshing, and that's how it got going, really.
And from this book, you've started a podcast of the same name, Around the World in 80 Cigars. Yeah. And so it's interesting to me that you're in both of these creative spaces. And what I mean by that is you're in both of these worlds, so to speak. You're in the author category. You've been a journalist. You're a proper writer, as they would say, I believe, in the UK. You are a proper writer. Yeah. But you're also in this podcast space.
Yeah.
Which includes guys like me, amateur writers, bloggers, vloggers, things like that. So you kind of coexist in both of these spaces. And I've listened to your podcast, and it's a lot of fun. And you have all of these great guests on from around the industry and people that you have known for years. And you get them on and you get their take and you find out what's going on in their lives. And it's a fun podcast. I invite you to go check it out, Around the World in 80 Cigars podcast. But like, what do you see as the big difference between these two spaces other than the mediums, as far as what kind of preparation goes into, journalism and writing a book and writing for a cigar magazine and manufacturers, and then just doing things for yourself, where maybe it's even just writing the book or doing the podcast or having conversations and putting it out there in the ether with people around the industry?
No, that's a really good point. And it came about, so the book came out, and once it got traction and I realized that it was something worth pursuing and I enjoyed it. And actually, you get a feel for something when you write it. Sometimes you have to write about something you're not that keen on, you write it, it's okay, you get it done. Sometimes you write about something that you really love and you have a passion for, that excites you or interests you, and inevitably the end result is much better. And I thought in my mind that the stuff I'd written was really quite good. I'd never say that to anybody. It's a very, very un-English thing to do, but in my mind, I thought this is really good, and it made me laugh thinking back to these stories and things, and I was chuckling away to myself. I thought, well, that's a good sign, authors always say, write for yourself first, and I think if you've got the right story, then that does work. So that came out. The book came out in autumn 2019, I guess. And then, of course, within 6 months or whatever, the world was turned upside down, and the dreaded pandemic was upon us, and my life, which at that point pretty much existed in terms of traveling, meeting new people, writing about interesting places and people and brands, and I write books for people. as well. You know, I produced coffee table books and things for brands, and of course, all of that just stops overnight because A, you can't travel, and B, people suddenly are not throwing money into marketing or anything other than surviving at that stage. So that was a real wake-up call. And I literally thought to myself, right, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with yourself on a daily basis? Because what you can't do is sit here, look at these walls for the next X number of months. You know, you're driving mad.
Right.
And one of the other things I've always done, James, is I've never been one to keep a diary, but I have kept a sort of audio diary. And ever since phones and my brain have had the capability to work out how to do it, I've kept a little audio voice recordings of, you know, stuff that's going on, whether that be when the kids were little and they were just playing around in the background and we were having a conversation, or if I was somewhere interesting, I would just have it. And when I was traveling it, you know, I would walk down around the square in Verona or something, and I just have my audio on, and you'd hear all these Italian voices, and you'd hear the mopeds going past, and you'd hear people sitting at the cafes drinking Aperol Spritz as I walked past, you know. And it sounds, it sounds a bit trite, but when you listen back to those things, they just take you straight back there. And I just thought that was fabulous. I loved it, and the stuff when the kids were small, you know, and they're talking to each other, you know, and now they're both, you know, teenagers and grown up. It is priceless, just priceless, almost in a way more than pictures, because, you know, sound is, as you know, doing what you do is such a big thing. You know, it gets inside your brain, and it's like the sense of smell. It takes you back immediately to that place, and you can remember what you were doing, how you were feeling. And so I had loads of these recordings from trips all around the world, and I would talk to the diary. You know, if I was on a trip, sometimes it gets lonely or something happens and, you know, you lose something, or somebody stiffs you over in a shop or in a taxi, and you feel bad and you're on your own and you're away from your family, and sometimes you feel a bit lonely. I would talk to the audio and say, well, you know, this has just happened. I'm stuck in this hotel. It's crap. I can't get out, or I can't get a drink, or whatever my gripe might be. And they became my way of sort of expressing myself. So, I'm sorry, it's such a long-winded answer.
No, you're fine. Like, this is such a great story. I love it.
Please just yell stop when you end up. And I thought, you know what? I've always sort of thought after a few years, like, you know, you have got this treasure trove of stuff. What are you going to do with it? And I sort of toyed with the idea in the background of doing something about the cigars. You know, you've got all this material of you walking around, you know, plantations in Nicaragua, or interviewing, you know, Jonathan Drew or whatever it might be. But I just thought, I'm too busy, haven't got the time, I don't know how to do it, I know nothing of that world. Well, of course, when all this went mad in early 2020, I thought, well, now you have got the time on your hands. What are you going to do? Well, look, just get on with it.
Right.
And so I did, in a very, very basic, unprofessional, amateurish way, just pick up my contact book and think, you know, these are people I just think are amazing. Why don't I ring them up and chat to them? I can't go and see them, and we can't do the things we normally do. But hey, we're all sitting at home, and we all suddenly learned about this amazing thing called Zoom that I had no idea existed.
Right.
And so that's literally what I did. And every day, virtually, I would go in my office and sit down and fire off an invitation to somebody in my little black book of contacts who I found interesting, and we would sit and chat for an hour. And it's never scripted, other than, you know, let's talk around this. And it's just like two pals having a chat over a pint or over a cigar. And it quite often is over a cigar. And it's not just cigars, it's, you know, anything. You know, I've done all sorts of odd things. There's a Savile Row tailor in there who's a pal of mine and talks about making suits for Prince Charles. And there's a guy who makes these most amazing outdoor wood-fired ovens that he puts in people's, you know, gardens and in restaurants and in celebrity chefs' places all around the country. And there's just so many amazing people in the world. And I think sometimes we miss an opportunity to hear their stories in you know, in the rush to do other things and to watch video or to, you know, sit in front of a telly, and you forget that audio is huge. I listen to a lot of radio, and I love audiobooks. You know, I listen to audiobooks every day, and I love podcasts, and I listen to several of those on a regular basis, and I just think it's a wonderful thing. So whilst I would never profess to be an expert and to do it, you know, in a fully professional manner, I do think it's a very powerful thing, and it has worked. You know, people do enjoy a long form chat between two people that, you know, comfortable and in each other's company and inquisitive, I guess.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you have a great way of conveying that in this space with your friends and with the people in your little black book, as you put it, that you call them up and it is like just, you know, two old friends drinking a beer.
Yeah.
What else are we going to do during the pandemic? And it's kind of like you said, it kind of turned everything and like all of our worlds upside down, and it has given you this opportunity to do this. And it's such a great space. Again, go check it out, Around the World in 80 Cigars podcast, because it is.
Sorry, James, did you find it the same? I mean, were you thinking, right, you know, how the hell is this going to affect me? Or were you able to sort of get on with pretty much what you were doing before?
I've been doing this for 10 years, different kinds of, over 10 years at this point, different kinds of podcasts and whatnot. Right. So it was more of just me moving into this space and saying, okay, well, I like cigars. Like I found this hobby. Yeah. How can I combine these two hobbies? And so I think if you go and you listen to the first few episodes, as with any podcast, it's really trying to find your feet and find what direction you're going to go. And then once you hit your stride, like then it's just keeping that momentum going, and consistency of audio and all of those different things that make podcasts so wonderfully frustrating.
Definitely.
So I want to ask this. I want to go back to the book, Around the World in 80 Cigars, the Travels of an Epicure. In the very first chapter, like you have such a way with words, Nick. Like I'm sitting there, and I don't want to spoil the chapter for anybody, but let's just say that Nick has a great way of like making you feel the suspense, the tension that's there or maybe not there. And it just kind of depends on your perception of things. You have this wonderful way of getting people to perceive it. Like, is that exactly how it happened? Like in your memory, or did you take some of these stories from, you know, the audio diary that you kept? Like, was anything embellished? Because some of these stories,
they are pretty much, they're all pretty much how it happened. I mean, you know, you with the benefit of hindsight and the wisdom of the ages afterwards, you know, you can add a little bit of color and a bit of perspective to them. Some of them I have audio from, but some of the one you're talking about is Mr. Moustache, isn't it? In Tunisia, yes. Which, I mean, feel free if you want to quote anything from the book, you're very welcome. But for listeners who haven't got it in front of them, it's a story about, and it's the start of the book, and it's a very silly little story, really, but it's a useful platform from which to launch into this book, which is a collection of standalone chapters about different escapades and daft things I've found myself doing. And this is about a trip to Tunisia I made, I guess it was back in the 90s or something. And I managed to coincide my trip with the outbreak of the Second Gulf War. And Tunisia being a sort of quite a, you know, strict Muslim country, it was all a bit hairy at one point because we weren't sure how we were going to be perceived as Westerners. And anyway, so I rock up, and, you know, as this fairly clueless Englishman abroad, and go riding off, and, you know, into the souk, into the market, and wander about, and, you know, try and make myself at home in Sousse in Tunisia. And then I find this little alley, and off I go up this alley and turn left and right and in the maid, and I find this little tiny cafe in the middle of nowhere, and in I go, and then it's just the tale, this snapshot of being in this cafe when I walk in, and there's this really massive, hairy guy, you know, and he doesn't speak any English, and I don't speak any French. You can speak to them, but my French is not that good. And we have this ridiculous comedy between us of trying to understand each other, and me thinking, "Oh my God, he's going to bloody drag me out in a minute and stone me or something," and him just thinking this English idiot has wandered in and doesn't know what he's doing, and that sort of gives me a nice info to the world that I live in, and also the fact that whenever something is going on, whether it's adventurous or fun or relaxing or terrifying, the cigar is never very far away. And that's another thing we love about cigars. There's always an excuse to have one, right? If you're celebrating, you have a cigar. If you're commiserating, you have a cigar. If you want to get yourself up and have a drink on a Friday night, you have a cigar. And if you want to picnic and relax on a Sunday night, you have one too. And I think
it's so great because you paint this picture, and you can almost picture this cafe where it's hot, it's dusty, there's a ceiling fan, and on the television there's the Gulf War going on, right? The second Gulf War, and he's Mr. Moustache, excuse me, Mr. Moustache is pointing at the TV, or so you think he's pointing at the TV, like almost as if you did this, why are you doing this kind of thing? And then you see, and so you are freaking out internally. That's
exactly it. And my mind, in my silly little brain, I'm thinking, oh, he's going, this is your fault. What do you think you're doing here? Come over here. And this is, and I'm going, oh, shit, am I, is there an angry mob going to come around the corner,
And all he wanted, it's so great. All he wanted to know is if you wanted some tea.
He was just trying to ask me if I wanted some peppermint tea.
I could just picture you, because I would be the same way, going, oh man, what have I got myself into? Like, I'm smoking a cigar. Like, is this the last cigar I'm smoking? Is this it? Is this the one?
That feeling, that horrible cold feeling that goes up and down your spine, and you start to sweat, and you think, oh shit, this is getting out of hand here, and then suddenly the utter relief when I realised, no, you idiot, he's just, trying to talk to you like any normal person would.
That would totally be me. It's such a great story. And you have so many of these. I don't want to say it's like a collection of short stories, but it is, but they all revolve around cigars, or the culture. And I believe it's the next chapter where you're in Bosnia and you wander out into what might be a minefield, like a landmine field.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, so so you go from one chapter, the first chapter, to the opening chapter with Mr. Moustache, where it's okay. Am I in trouble? Am I in trouble? Am I in trouble? Oh no, it's all good. It's just, my brain's in overdrive. And then to the next chapter, you're like, I'm in trouble. Serious trouble.
That's exactly it. And then you go from sort of one fairly frivolous story and you go into maybe a more serious one for a little while at least. And that was again another true story. I was sent out to Bosnia mid-90s perhaps to cover the tail end of the war out there, which was, as you know, a horrendous thing. And there were some troops out there, local troops, where I was living at the time, and so the army said, "Come out and shadow the troops. We want to be able to show you what we're doing out here. We're doing some good. We're keeping the peace." And I was a young kid, and I thought, yeah, this is a great way to cut my teeth. I'm going to go and be a war reporter. So up I went, and it was just the most remarkable experience in every way. And I spent some time living with the army, in theatre, as they call it, and we toured around and went through the villages, and got out and went up and down the street, and there were always armed soldiers with me, and there were militia from the other sides coming past, and the two would like Mexican standoff for a while, and it was all just so surreal. The story that it focuses on, we were in this pretty little village, and we stopped as the army seems to do every 5 minutes for a cup of tea, and we'd been told so many times when we landed in Split, what you don't forget, this is the most mined place on earth at the moment. Everywhere, every square bit of land you can think of has probably been mined as these various factions retreat and leave these, lovely boobies prizes for the next person who happens to come along.
Yeah.
Just the most extraordinary, and I sort of wax on about this in the book a little bit. I just think mines are the most extraordinary example of human psychology you could ever come up with. I mean, it's hard to imagine a more wicked device that, just to achieve. You can understand, let's say you've got a castle and you mine the land around it so no one can attack you. Fair enough. I can sort of see the sense in that. But then let's take the example of, you're a retreating force who's retreating in the face of an overwhelming enemy. So then you just mine everything. So that not only are you going to take a few of them with you, but then it renders that patch of land useless for the next 100 years or whatever it might be that it takes to clear it. And it's not only your enemy then, by this time, of course, is everything and anybody and anything that comes anywhere near, whether that be whether that be some deer or animals or cattle or children, or it's just the most extraordinary psychology, I think, about mines. And anyway, I digress. But we've been told so many times, for God's sake, don't spray off the hard standing. Just stay, where you know that it is concrete, and then you're safe. That was basically what they told us. But of course, you're just not used to that instruction. And also, I'm a bit absent-minded, as you may have gathered from the various stories. I tend to go off in a flight of fancy, and my brain takes me somewhere, and I start thinking about something. And maybe I'm thinking about how would I write this story, or who would I have in it, and what would the intro be? And then I just start wandering off, and then I just hear this old guy calling and calling a local chap, waving and shouting. I look around, I can't understand what he's saying, but he's saying Mine, Mine. I realised at the time afterwards he's saying Mine. I could just think, I don't know what he's talking about, so I ignored him and I carried on wandering off. And then one of the soldiers starts shouting at me and basically says, "Don't move." And then of course, with that horrible sinking feeling yet again, I think I've dropped myself in it. I realised that I might just be wondering about where there might be some mines. So and what adds beautifully to the story, of course, in hindsight, and of course the fact that I'm talking to you now means that I wasn't.
Right. Like you wrote the book. Right. I knew you lived because I looked to see who wrote the book. So I was cool with the story.
And at the time I had got a little Monte Cristo number 4, I think it was, out on my pack, yes. And a little Cuban Monte Cristo, and I was sort of contemplatively smoking this when all this went on, and so it gave me a lovely hook to describe how I felt at that moment and the emotions that went through me. And I can distinctly remember the feel of the breeze against my skin as I talk about, you suddenly realize all the things that you don't even know to take any notice of when you are forced to suddenly contemplate your mortality in a way. I can remember every sound, every sight, and everything was so rich and clear, and you're thinking, hell, I hope I get through this. But the Monty was with me, and I think, if it hadn't been for that cigar, I would think I would have been much more, crazy. I think I would have been much more psyched out by it all. But because of our blessed cigar, it was there with me even in my moment of peril.
Right, because the cigar is a way to slow down. It's a way. It forces you to kind of slow down and take stock of the situation, no matter if you're just relaxing, whether you're celebrating, or whether you're standing in the middle of a possible minefield.
No, exactly, James. And if you're gonna force yourself to be zen, then there's no better way of doing it, I don't think.
That's right. I want to ask one not so serious question before we kind of move on a little bit, because I have a ton of questions for you and your perspective of certain things. But my like non-serious question: Are you a Star Wars fan or not, Nick? Like you're killing me with this other Tunisian story where you go and you're in the you go to where the Skywalker ranch was on Tatooine. And of course, in the book, you're proper British. Like, I do not know. I'm not watching Star Wars. Absolutely not. I am here because I wanted to go to the Coliseum. I have no desire to be here. It's hot as hell, and I'm going to go smoke a cigar outside. Are you or are you not? Like, on the record, Nick, let's find out. Are you a Star Wars fan?
Here's the deal, James. When I was a kid, I had an AT-AT, and I had Jabba the Hutt, whole kit with his dungeon, and I had stormtroopers and Luke Skywalker in many forms, and I loved it.
Perfect.
I was massive fan.
Yeah, no, I'm a Star Wars fan still. And my wife and I finished the Book of Boba Fett last night. So.
Yes, well, funnily enough, I've just picked my girls up from school, and the first thing they said to me was, "It's the last one. We're going to watch it tonight," and so we're going to do the same.
Nice. You're in for a good treat. I think I enjoyed the last episode. I think more than I enjoyed the rest of them.
Oh, good.
I want to ask you, Nick, because you've gone to a lot of places, and I think I know the answer to this question, but you've gone to a lot of places around the world. You have visited a lot of different areas. You've met a lot of different people. You've interacted with a lot of different cultures. And I think just based on one of the chapters in your book, I think I know, but what is your favorite place to travel to?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. I ask myself that a lot, and I'm a very Catholic sort of person in my tastes. In that I like all sorts of music. I love opera. I love rock and roll. I love blues. And same with food. I like to try foods from all over the world, and I like different cultures. Sometimes you just want to walk around London and hit the bars, or sometimes you want to do something totally out in the ordinary and be in Tokyo eating sushi. But there's always something that really gets you, and I have to say I found being in Africa very spiritual for me, particularly being out in the wildlife. And as it happens, I'm touch wood and touching all available and fingers crossing all available. I'm due to be flying out to Kenya on Sunday, which is my first big trip for it must be 2 years or something.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm sort of immensely looking forward to it, and B, slightly nervous and a bit stressed about all the bloody regulations and hoops you've got to jump through in order to get there. But
I can imagine.
I mean, it's just, you can imagine trying to figure out what the Kenyans want you to bring from their website. They're not the best at explaining themselves, bless them. But
no.
Africa to me, being on safari is a life-changing thing, and if you've never done it, I can't urge you strongly enough to do it. Even if you're not, I'm an outdoor guy. I love wildlife and nature, and even if that's not your biggest thing, I'm sure you get something out of it. It's just such a beautiful way of spending time away from all the things that we're used to in this modern life that we live in. And I'm not saying all of those things we have are bad, because we're blessed, aren't we? And we live in warm houses and eat food when we want it.
Absolutely.
And all the rest of it. But to be able to go out and sleep in a tent and observe these incredible creatures up close it's such a privilege. And there are places in the world where our kids and their kids may not get a chance to see some of these animals. That's the reality of the world we're living in. So, but apart from the moralizing and all of that stuff, I just think it just stirs my soul. And you wake up in the morning, you go on an early morning game drive, and you might sit and watch a pod of hippos and listen to them honking, and then maybe you spot an elephant or even a herd of elephant, and if you park up and they come right past you, and you can hear the plods of their feet and them breathing through their trunks and then snapping twigs, and then they rumble to each other, and it's a huge sound and then you can hear their stomachs rumbling as they go past, and then at night, if you sit around a campfire and suddenly a lion starts roaring, and it's probably miles away, but it sounds like it's, in the next tent. And this noise is the most extraordinary noise that you would ever hear. It's at such a pitch that it throbs through your guts. You can feel it, let alone hear it. And they make this sort of noise like this, and it just sort of booms through you. And of course, there's something very prehistoric about an animal that's going to eat you. Every alarm bell in the human psyche goes off, and you're sitting there going, "Oh my God!" And every hair on the back of your neck, and all the cliches you can think of, and it is just wonderful. So yeah, that would be my answer. I think I'd do that. But I love, I love the sea. I love Caribbean for obvious reasons. I love it all.
Yeah. Do you think that maybe you like Africa because it reminds you on a primal level of just a simpler time? Like we're so inundated every day, especially during the pandemic, because what the hell else are we going to do? We've got TVs, we've got podcasts, we've got radio, we've got our phones all the time. But when you're out in the wild, and like even to say that, because you're very protected when you do these safaris, and it's all there for you to enjoy and not be in any kind of sort of real danger. But at the same time, that's as close as we're going to get in a modern day life to being in the wild. Do you think that that's kind of I don't know, that's why you kind of sense that on a spiritual level? And then to kind of bring that back to cigars, like when you enjoyed that cigar in the hot tub that night, while you were, after everything was done and everything's over and you're listening to the sounds of the jungle, were you able to slow down and experience that in a different way because of the cigar? Because that's a touch of modern there in the wild. Was that can you describe that for us? Was that, do you think that's maybe why it was a little bit more of a religious experience for you?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's partly, genuinely, I think it's to do with Africa, and particularly the East. The plains of Africa are the cradle of mankind. As far as we know, and from fossilized records, that is where man first sort of walked as a Homo sapien. So I think there's an echo of that. I really do. And yeah, you're right. Also, I think it's so raw is not the right word. It sort of sounds dangerous. And as you say, don't worry about going there. You're with guys who know what they're doing, and you're looked after royally. And honestly, the food and drink and the fun and laughter is just extraordinary. But it is the wildest thing you can experience, I think, because it is real nature, untrammeled by man as much as possible. So these animals roam hundreds and thousands of miles across vast tracts of land. Obviously, there's an issue. More and more of it is being carved up. But it's such a huge place. The sky is so massive. They talk about we've only have a little reserve here or something, and then they'll tell you it's 60,000 square miles or something.
It's only a little reserve.
You just can't get your head around it, and it's everything is on such a grand scale. Down to the animals and the sunsets and the sunrises and the birds are just spectacular. You see these incredible birds flying about, and you think, wow, this is like, Disney. And yeah, I think that is it. You are there, and you know what it's like if you get out in the sticks and get out in the fresh air and sun on your face, and by the end of the day you're tired, but in a good way tired, and your lungs are full of oxygen, and you think, really, this is the way we should be living, not sitting on our backsides all day long and just scoffing rubbish, which we all do, because that's that's what our life is, unfortunately. But the more you can encourage yourself and make yourself have those experiences, I think you're right. I think you really get a glimpse of what life should be about.
All right, so I want to switch gears just a little bit again, but I want to talk about your love affair with Cuba, because out of all of the chapters in your book, Cuba, I felt, maybe it's just me and maybe it's in my head, but I felt like that was the one where you really connected with, and you connected not only with the cigar culture, but with the people. Can you talk a little bit about your love affair with Cuba and then even Cuban cigars? Because as Americans, as you know, we're not able to get those. So I want to talk about this, and then I want to kind of go into the differences, worldview of Cuban cigars. So what's with the love affair of Cuba?
No, you're right. It's almost impossible not to fall in love with it if you go there. Now, I understand the sensitivity of the issue with a lot of people in the US. You know, a lot of Cuban expats that, you know, have got stories to tell and don't like the fact that, you know, we bang on about Cuba. I do understand that. In fact, I had a lot of conversations about people about the chapter, whether or not it should even be in the book. And I'm somebody who has no axe to grind, right? You know, I don't sit on any particular one side of the fence. I don't, you know, I've always been, as a journalist, try to be ruthlessly impartial and just talk about what I see in here and how it feels to me. And wherever you fall on that political thing is entirely your business. But if you're writing a book about cigars and travel, then to my mind, it would be irreparably poorer if you didn't write about Cuba. It is a stunning, magical, strange, sad, beautiful, magical, as I say, place. You know, it's an extraordinary place to visit because there's nowhere quite like it. You have this sort of, you have the Caribbean vibe, of course, but it couldn't be more unlike Barbados or somewhere. You have this faded grandeur all around you, everywhere, of when this was the playground of the rich and the famous and the great and the good and the not so good. But that is this crumbling facade. And behind that is this really sad story of people who, you know, just struggle to eat on a daily basis, frankly. Now, having said all of that, you know, a lot of them are just genuinely really happy, lovely people who have just a tremendous charisma about them. And they take you to their bosom in an instant, and they look after you, and you become part of the family. And, you know, they sort of insist that, no, you must come back. And when you come back, you stay with me. You know, you can't stay anywhere else. That's the sort of people they are. They are incredibly open and warm compared to, for example, you know, like a Westerner, a Londoner or somebody, or a Brit. You know, you meet them and we could be good friends by the end of a couple of weeks. But with a Cuban, you know, you spend a couple of hours in a bar with them and you've got a pal for life, you know, and that's very, very attractive in their personality. And they're very quick to smile, but they have a lovely way of enjoying themselves, knowing that they don't have a lot, but what they do have, they really enjoy. And that's why I think, you know, if you ever get the chance, you should just go and experience it. It changes a lot, Cuba, I've noticed, in the sort of 20 years or whatever since I've been going. It goes through phases, it goes through periods. You know, there's maybe a relaxation in some of the attitude from the US, and things get a bit better economically, perhaps, for them, and then something changes, or the government has a crackdown, or maybe they get a bit more access to the internet, or maybe a bit more private business is allowed. But the country changes quite a lot over the years. You know, you can go one time and go back 2 or 3 years later, and you can feel that there's a difference. And I haven't been now for a few years, 2-3 years, but I had a pal who was recently there, and he said it really changed. They've had a terrible time economically, and he said for the first time, you know, there is a lot more crime, you know, sort of petty crime, and you don't feel as safe as you once did. You know, that was the beauty of Havana. You could walk along the Malecon with a bottle of rum at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you'd be absolutely safe as houses and talk to anybody. And it sounds like, you know, it's because these people are so desperate that may be changing, which is terribly sad. But it is, it is just such an enchanting place.
Yeah, I'm doing a Cuban series with a mutual friend of ours, Nick
Yeah.
from LH Cigars,
Great
and yeah, great dude, and very knowledgeable when it comes to Cuba. And he mentioned that he met you in Cuba.
That's right.
But so you're an author, obviously, but why not write the book? I mean, I'll just ask you point blank, why not write the book on all of these Cuban expats and their experience? Because as cigar smokers,
Yeah.
we always kind of romanticize a little bit, I think, Cuba. And it sounds like it's a very beautiful country, and I can't wait to go one day.
Yeah.
And it sounds like they are a lovely people. And based on their history, they've always been under somebody's thumb.
Yes.
They've always been somebody's pawn all throughout their history. And why not write the book and tell the expat side? Because I think they do have a legitimate gripe and complaint to continue to pressure the U.S. government to, keep the embargo up. And so I understand their side of it, but I also understand the plight of the Cuban people. So why not write a book? Is it just because it's too politically divisive?
No, I think that's a really good idea. It would be amazing, wouldn't it? I mean, my first thought would be, as a journalist, author, an entrepreneur, how do we pay for it? How do you fund the production of the book? And then I would think, so what sort of a book is it going to be? Is it going to be a proper read, or is it going to be a coffee table? Is it going to be a heavy book? Is it going to be lots of stories about families ripped apart, businesses burning, or is it going to be a story of redemption and rebuilding elsewhere? I think it's a very good idea.
I think it could be a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B.
Yeah.
As far as, is it a story of redemption, or is it a story of families torn apart and buildings burning? Because I think both of those things are true when it comes to the story of the expats of the Cuban people. I mean, these guys had their farms ripped away by the communist government.
Yeah.
They were exiled. They were dissidents. They were, beaten, killed, flogged. Like it runs the gambit.
Yeah. Yeah. And then are you particularly thinking cigar families?
Yeah, I think cigar families. I think that would be, look, you could start there, but I'm certain you wouldn't end there.
No.
The stories are very varied, various backgrounds and long. So the book could encompass all of it, but I mean, you could certainly probably just do one on Cuban cigars. Because here's the thing, right? Because now we're going to get into New World cigars versus Cuban cigars,
yeah,
and the attitudes around the world. Because here in the U.S., we're kind of sheltered from it, and because Cuban cigars are kind of hard to come by, and here in the U.S., there's a lot of you only want them and you only like them because of the you're not supposed to have them. It's the forbidden fruit syndrome. But around the world, elsewhere outside the U.S., because this is a big old world. It's not just us. Cuban cigars are regarded as the cigars to have, although it kind of feels like that attitude might be shifting somewhat, and the world is kind of being open to some of these New World cigars that the U.S. has produced and others elsewhere. Is that the case? Do you see that, or are you still of the mind, Nick, that for yourself, like Cuban cigars are it, and as far as the rest of the world goes, like they're the same way?
I think it definitely is the case that in the last 10, 15 years that New World cigars have really stolen a march on what was a massively Cuban market. I think any figure would tell you that. There are still places in the world that are still hugely predominantly Cuban. I mean, London is still a very big Cuban market for those that decide that's what they want. And there's various nuances for that, and it's not a straight question of are they better or are they more, tastier or are they better value or whatever. It's more to it than that. There's a lot of reasons, but from my perspective, as I think I write in the book, if you put a gun to my head and said, right, we're going to shoot you in the morning, what's your last meal and what's your last smoke, I would probably have a great bit of of beef, Scotch beef, and I would have a lovely bottle of claret, and I probably would choose a really good Cuban cigar that I knew was going to work. And and that's because I do think it is by God's grace, the thumbprint on the earth where cigar tobacco seems to grow best. I just think that I do think that's a fact. But that's not to say that fabulous cigars aren't made elsewhere. And the fact that it is this, hallowed ground with all the right things, doesn't stop human beings from buggering it up and
right.
and like over farming it and under investing in it, and then overproducing and all the other problems that we know and recognise that Cuba, bless it, does have. So that's why I think it's great that I have this Catholic taste, because I can get benefit from everything. I don't sit here at night when I'm about to light a cigar pining thinking I wish I could have a Cuban. But I love them when I have them, and when they're good, they are sublime. But there are plenty of great cigars out there made by people, as you know, from all over the world. Particularly Nicaragua is now huge, and a lot of that is down to United States money and folks from your part of the world that have invested that money in that infrastructure and that the knowledge of some of those expats and stuff, which is their redemption story, I guess. So no, yeah. I love it all, and I love the variety. I think that's a great part of the interest for me. My life is about trying new things and finding new stories or new angles and meeting new people and going new places. That is a big part of what keeps me motivated and interested. And in cigars, that's, as I said at the beginning, that's just an endless journey, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. So what has your New World cigar journey looked like? Like, where did you, I guess, why did you start smoking New World cigars? Was it just because, okay, well, this is just something different than a Cuban, or was it, the Cubans aren't, a couple out of every box that I have aren't smoking right? Like, what was it that prompted you to go, let me check these out?
That's a good question. Again, I think maybe one of the initial reasons that gets people into it, especially over here, is price. Because when you're a youngster and you like the idea of smoking a cigar, and you go to this cigar shop and they say, here's a cigar, so it's only a little one, but it costs you £20, and then you think, well, this isn't something I'm going to be sustaining for very long. And then you start doing your research and you talk to people and you find out that there's cigars from other places that aren't as expensive. And I think a lot of people start that way, and I would probably have been one of them. And then, of course, when you get deeper involved, as I did, then you begin to know the characters and people behind some of these cigars, and indeed some of the places. And then you sort of have a bit of a soft spot for them, and you sort of fall in love with them as well. So, for example, I wrote Hoya de Nicaragua's book to celebrate their 50th anniversary, Cinco Décadas, the rise of the Nicaraguan cigar. And so I spent some time over there with them in that marvelous country, interviewing amazing people and politicians and historians and poets and farmers and people in that factory who've got the most extraordinary story to tell. And of course, so that now holds a very dear place in my heart, that factory and those people. And that's what you do. You're like a magpie, really, as a roving writer, I guess. You go around picking up these little nuggets, and you keep a little of something of all of them in you. Like I always say to my wife, I don't know, I'm no expert in anything, but I do seem to know an awful lot about an awful lot, a little bit about an awful lot of things, I guess that's what makes me a good conversationalist. If you're in the pub, someone will mention something, and there's a good chance that over the years I will have dabbled in it in some way or another by interviewing somebody involved, but I used to get, because I write in this way that is quite, how you describe it, first-hand sort of experiential style, as you say, you can, in your mind, you can picture it, and that is my great strength, I think, that I can write so that I carry you with me almost. And the magazine over here picked up on that years ago, and they used to send me off to do all these wild and wonderful things because I could come back and paint this picture that, really it was quite evocative to the readers, and they'd say, right, we want to send you lobster fishing off Scotland, and I'd go up there and get on the boat with this hoary old lobster fisherman, and off we'd go, and the sea spray would be flashing in my face, and I'd be like trying to keep my feet, and I could sort of report all this back in a way that makes you feel a bit like you're there. And I guess that's really where the beauty of that medium comes in, because I love to read. I've read all my life, and my kids love to read. I just think it's the best thing. If I've got 10 minutes, I'll grab my Kindle and I'm into my book that I'm reading at the moment. I just adore it, because to me, every time you open that book or flip that page, it's escapism. It's going back to when I was a kid, and I'd sit and read, dinosaur stories, or I'd read Conan Doyle, or I'd read Jules Verne, and my mum would say, "Come on, you can't sit there all day. You've got to go and get some fresh air." And I'd drag my heels out. All I wanted to do is sit in deep with these adventures and these stories, King Solomon's Mines, and all of that stuff. And I think that takes me back to it. It's a very strong urge, that childhood thing, isn't it? The older I get, the more I realise that actually all you ever really want is what made you happy when you were a kid, pretty much. And
I think that's right.
Yeah, things that really you loved when you were a lad. Maybe it was whatever it might be. You love cars, or you love the outdoors. I always love wildlife, and it sticks with you. And I think, we spend so long getting away from that and learning about the world and doing stuff, and then we forget actually to go back to those things that really make us fly. And I think writing and being able to write is one of those things for me. I was never much good at any other subjects. I haven't got a maths brain, or I'm not a businessman, but I do seem to have this ability to express, in a way that is compelling, things that I've been able to see and do. And that's why it's been a blessed ride, really.
Oh, absolutely. You do have this way of doing that, where you paint this whole picture, and as the reader, you can almost smell the cigar. You can almost, taste the dirt in your mouth from the, the dust in the air.
Yeah.
You can almost you really take us along with you. And so when you paint a picture of these places like Cuba and Nicaragua, and you can tell that and even Africa, you can tell that you've fallen in love with those places.
Yeah.
And you describe them in such a way that as the reader, you fall in love with those places as well. And so I really do think that you have a fantastic book. It's called Around the World in 80 Cigars, The Travels of an Epicure. And if you're not sure what Epicure means, that means you're probably American. Go look it up. Go look it up.
Every day's a learning day, James.
That's right. That's what I had to do. But it is a fantastic book, and you have a great podcast called Around the World in 80 Cigars podcast, Nick. Go check them out. Follow him on Instagram. His handle is Nick_Hammond_writer. You do some things on YouTube as well with some friends in the industry, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Another lockdown became a lockdown project, and thank you for your kind words, by the way. It's lovely to hear that, because when you're a lone wolf, you spend all your time sitting on your own. And I spent a long, cold winter in my little office in my garden finishing the book, and wondering, was anyone ever going to read it? Are you just wasting your time? So to hear, your words, and you've obviously read and enjoyed it, is an absolute joy for me, and I really appreciate you saying it. Yeah, when lockdown came, as we've already discussed, I just tried to keep myself as busy as possible. And one of my pals in the industry over here is Lawrence Davis, who owns the Cigars store in Mount Street, one of the world's probably most famous cigar stores, and a marvelous little place. It's just like a little magic paradise of cigars. You never know who you're going to see in there, and what you're going to end up talking about. And he's such a character, Lawrence. He's larger than life in every respect. He used to be quite a big chap until about 2 years ago, and then he's just lost a massive amount of weight. He's lost like 11 stone, and he is a remarkable character. He's got such fortitude. If he decides he's doing something, he just does it. And he's very, very dry and very funny, and he's a great pal, and we have such a laugh. And we decided that let's do something to keep people entertained. in the same similar theme to the podcast, really. And he said, let's do some. We started doing some live Instagrams, and so on a Tuesday night at 6:00, we'd do an Instagram, and anyone who happened to be around could join us, and we'd have a smoke, and I would do a cigar quiz, and that's what we did for weeks and weeks and months and months and months, and it got real following, and people enjoyed it, and we used to do it on a Tuesday and a Friday, and it's gone on for years. And we eventually abandoned the Tuesday one when lockdown started to ease. The Friday one. But every Tuesday at 6 p.m. we all gather under the Salter banner and we talk absolute rubbish. And as a result of that, we also started filming YouTube videos. And that would generally involve Lawrence and I sitting around and tasting a cigar of the day, whatever that might be. A new Cuban. I've managed to drag him kicking and screaming into the New World beer, which I was told it would never happen. So, I knew I just played a long game. And there's lots of banter, lots of fun. And he absolutely rips me to pieces. And I very sort of slyly get my own back to those that watch carefully. And no, it's a sound to YouTube that they really are popular. It's extraordinary. We just sort of ramble on about things that are going on, but people seem to like it.
No, it's great. It's great content. It's very funny. You guys go check it out. YouTube, and then at the Souter. Isn't it on their Instagram or your Instagram? It's on one of their Instagrams. I don't remember. Yeah.
It's on the Souter Insta, and and you can you'll find it on YouTube. But it's a bit of fun.
I want before we get out of here, because I know you're busy and like your kids are home now and from school, and so you want to go spend time with family. So I don't want to keep you too long, but very quickly, if you take Cuba and Nicaragua out of the equation, and what is, in your opinion, the best cigar lounge that you've run into? Because you do a lot of traveling, so when you're out and about, like, where's the one spot that you really, really want to smoke a cigar all the time, where you think to yourself, man, if I could be there right now, that's where I'd be?
Wow. That's a really good thought. Lawrence and I were planning just before lockdown that we were going to write this book. Or I was going to write it. He was going to help me put it together, and we'd finance it, called 100 Great Places to Smoke a Cigar. And we were getting people to suggest all these amazing places around the world. And of course, all it's happened, and the ability to be able to actually do that and to interest people in becoming involved has dropped, but we will pick it up again. There are so many great places, and not necessarily because they're swish or fancy or even cigar bars. It might just be a fabulous spot that you like to smoke. But in terms of actually narrowing it down to lounges and bars and things, so Cuba's out, Nicaragua's out.
Anywhere in the world, the lounge that you like the most, whether it's the atmosphere, the people, the selection, whatever it is, like, what's that one lounge that you're like, this is it? This is, like, if I was going to visit one last cigar lounge, this is the only one I was going to be able to, this is where I would go.
Depends what you want out of your trip, James. I mean, if you want a city visit where you can wander about and keep the missus happy and do a bit of shopping and have a bit of food and then nip into a fabulous lounge, then you can't say fairer than the one in the Kempinski in Munich in Germany. It's beautiful, opulent. You can sit up at the bar, grab yourself a nice Pilsner, and then wander across the foyer with this beautiful cupola in the ceiling, which is like a stained glass. And then you go up into this really lovely little cigar lounge where they'll happily clip and light your cigar, and you can sit and have your beer and chill. Or if you wanted to really be in an unusual place and experience something that you're just never going to get the experience again, your question makes me think of a little place on the island of Bolafushi in the Maldives. And as you know, there's lots of lovely, lovely places out there. And again, that's a bit like sort of Disneyfied island. It's just, the colours are extraordinary. Everything is so beautiful, so clean, so pure. The sand is so white. The sky is so blue. The sea is just the most unbelievable aquamarine colour. And you can stand on the beach and actually see the colours of the fish in the sea. It is that clear. And there's a fish. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's really hard to explain to you, but there's a fish there called a zebrafish. And it's unsurprisingly because they strike like a zebra. And they hang around in shoals, and you stand on the beach and you can see them coming. You can see this black and white thing flashing about. It's amazing. And then a baby shark comes swimming past, and you can see everything. And so there is a little spot on this island, and it's a wonderful, wonderful series of cabins and lodges and things. There's a little spot there next to the French restaurant, which they've turned into this little cigar terrace. And, occasionally the wind blows and you might get a little tropical storm. So it's like a perspexy type thing, but it's left open most of the time. There's some comfy chairs in there, and there's some drinks cabinet, and of course there's waiter service. And you sit down in this most surreal place, like a leather armchair, and then you open your eyes and look out, and you're looking across this extraordinary ocean with the beach gently lapping, the sea gently lapping up the beach in front of you. There's stingrays swimming about, baby sharks, and it's the most balmy year-round 30-degree beautiful temperature, and that pretty much sounds like heaven, doesn't it, James?
Yeah, it really does. I was just thinking to myself, man, I really wish I was there right now.
That with a glass of something at your elbow, and a host of memories to fall back on, I think is pretty much as a man can expect.
Wow. That was I think I want to visit there before I die, at least once.
Do it.
Maybe just go there and die there. I might be happy with that as well.
Absolutely. I tell you what, it'd be a lot worse places to go, I can tell you.
like a landmine field in Bosnia. Let me last question, Nick, and then we'll get out of here. In your personal collection of cigars, your personal stash, if you will, how many cigars do you own?
Surprisingly few, actually. A, because I do smoke them, and B, because I'm a poor writer and I can't afford them. I have a few boxes I've laid down of things that I think are A, going to be worth something, and B, will be better with a few years. And then I have 3 or 4 humidors. I've got behind me, I've got a cabinet humidor, a tall cabinet humidor that's got a few boxes in it. It's probably got 10, 15 boxes in it. There's a little fridge next to that with another half a dozen. And then I've got some in a humidor inside in the house. Again, not many. So really, compared to many people, I've got less than 100 boxes for sure.
Okay, less than 100 boxes. Okay, so you're talking like maybe 2,000.
Yeah, and the most, absolute most. But I enjoy them, James. I'm not one of those guys that hoards things. I don't.
Well, no. How many do you smoke in a day, Nick?
I will have, depending on what I'm doing. If I'm here in my office, which is just in the garden, I can smoke away to my heart's content. So I normally might have 1 or 2 in the day and another one in the evening, something like that. I'm not a massive consumer.
Sure, so like 2 or 3 a day.
Yeah, Lawrence might have 10 or 12.
Sure.
And he has like massive cigars. And if I have one in the morning or during the day, I'll have a little Broner or something. But so maybe it really does depend. Some days it might be 1, some days it might be 3.
See, I don't think that my wife has any room to complain because I only have 1,000 and you have 2,000. You're like, this is paltry compared to what?
Exactly.
What
she should
be
very, very pleased that you've been so restrained.
That's right. I have shown self-restraint. I try to tell her that all the time. Like, she doesn't listen. She doesn't listen. Is your wife supportive of this? Like, or is she just like, you're going to go smoke a cigar. It's fine. Like, just get out.
She's used to it, but it's been part of my life for nearly as long as she has. And we were childhood sweethearts. So yeah, she's seen it all. And
nice.
She sort of says, bloody hell, are you going out there again to smoke a cigar? And that can cause an issue sometimes. But
yeah.
But no, generally speaking, she realises what I get out of it, and because of what I do, sometimes I'm asked to go and visit somewhere nice and write about it. And of course, then she gets to tag along, so the complaints seem to disappear there.
They always do, don't they? When they get to tag along and go somewhere nice, the complaints disappear. Nick Hammond, author, journalist, writer, around the world in 80 cigars, The Travels of an Epicure. Pick this book up. Check his podcast out of the same name, Around the World in 80 Cigars podcast. Nick Hammond, thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it. I wish you all the success in the world with this book. I'm looking forward to the next one. I'm going to assume there's going to be an Around the World in 80 Cigars part 2.
Thank you, James. It's really good of you. Yeah, I am. I'm working on it. Obviously, things have slowed up for obvious reasons, but yeah, it is in production, and I'm delighted to say that the sort of response has been such that it's definitely worth me doing the second one. So I am going to do it Around the World in 80 Cigars part 2 or whatever it might be. But lovely for you to have me on. I really appreciate it, and thank you to all those that have bought the book and might buy the book in the future.
Go buy the book. You will not be disappointed. It's a fantastic read. Nick, thank you very much. And listeners, thank you so much for tuning in this time. Join me next time where I'm not quite sure what I'll be talking about, but I promise it'll be Simply Stogies. Stay smoky, friends.
Thank you for listening to Simply Stogies. Visit simplystogies.com for the latest articles and reviews. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for the latest in video content, and please rate and review Simply Stogies on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. You can follow James on his cigar journey on Instagram at Simply Stogies Podcast, all one word, and on Twitter at the Twitter handle at Simply Stogies. If you have a question or suggestion for James, or would like to be on the show, please send an email to info@simplystogies.com. The views and opinions expressed by James and his guests are their own and do not reflect those of Creative Brain Candy or their affiliates.